Thank you, Bob. Um, yes. Hey, ang Hamalyo, Hoya Tisdale, Tuwito ang Note. Said hello, my friends. My name is Red Eagle. Thank you for spending today, a portion of today with me. I'll be speaking on meeting cross-culturally with tribes, ethics and etiquette, and I'll be sharing my screen, which will be this one. And here we go. So yes, um, meeting cross-culturally with tribes, ethics, and etiquette. And for those who remember, I did this speech back in 2019. And so if you're returning, thanks for coming again. And if you're new, I hope you enjoy this and learn and grow from this. With that introduction, a little bit about myself. I mentioned my name, Ethan. My native name is Red Eagle, Kawakbuk. Red Eagle is a lot easier to say. I'm originally from Anchorage, Alaska, and I'm a descendant of four nations. I'm a quarter Inupiaq, which is Alaskan. We're up in the Arctic Circle. My family village is Kotzebue, named after a Russian explorer. I'm also a quarter Sioux from the Seven Council Fires, and we're located in the Dakotas. I'm also a quarter Navajo, part of the Bitterwater clan, and my family village is Cameron, and we're located in the Four Corners region. We call ourselves Dene, which means the people in our own language. Navajo, I think, is Apache for sheep stealer. Um, and so, yeah, a little bit about that. I'm also a quarter Thona Atam, which was formerly Papago. Papago was Apache for cotton picker, and Thona Atam is the people in our language, or desert dwellers, or people of the desert. We're located in southern Arizona, south of Phoenix, and west of Tucson, or Tuscan. Bit of experience. I have quite a few years as intercultural specialist. I worked with quite a few different cultures, and my background has been studying cultures and working with different cultures. So that's really fueled my passion and kind of what is one of the main driving forces of this presentation. I've also been a tribal liaison and am a tribal liaison, work with quite a few tribes over the years and have been to over 100 reservations throughout the states and work with tribes with SHN as a tribal liaison and a planner. If some of you may recall a previous presentation series that I've done, these are kind of the seven big ones. Today's topic is tribal etiquette and ethics. I also speak on tribal sovereignty and government around the powers and limitations of tribal governments and the extent of what that means. And I also speak to tribal consultation, different types of consultation, whether that be AB 52, Section 106, SB 18, or anything that's not under those three categories. Consultation policies, best practices, and tribal lands is another one. I talk about the reservation system or the rancheria system and how ancestral lands play a factor into this and the relationship between the people and the land. I also talk about tribal cultural resources and mitigations and tribal confidentiality, which is a huge component of all these different factors woven throughout. A few disclaimers before I dive into this, and that's when I mention tribes, I'm not literally speaking on behalf of all the tribes, just general. This is for educational purposes. I say that this results may vary because cross-cultural etiquette and ethics is not just a science, it's also an art, which means it depends on the different people involved. And any other political inclinations is not intentional. I'm just presenting on just general information. I'm also speaking mainly to sociocultural. Whenever someone mentions culture, I always have to clarify what aspect of culture. As you can see on this list, there are many different components of studying culture. And so I'll be speaking primarily to sociocultural. An outline of the presentation is the introduction, which we just did, cross-cultural communication. And then what I mainly want to focus on is the cross-cultural component around meetings. And that we'll break it up into before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting, and then some best practices, and I'll leave it open to questions and answers. So with that, there are some polling questions I have for you. You will be graded. No, I'm just kidding. This is just for your benefit. The first question is, how many federally recognized tribes are there? And there's several options, and I'll give you a moment to pick one in your mind. And the answer is 574. There are 574 federally recognized tribes. I include each of these numbers are significant, though. There are 229 tribes in Alaska alone, and 365 was an initiative by a tribal member wanting to take a picture of every tribe. And 400 is the number of non-federally recognized tribes within the US. And so as you can see, these are pretty big numbers, and they have a significant role in consultation and in meetings. So starting off broad and then honing in on the different aspects of meetings is the cross-cultural communication. Culture and society change a lot through time. And I have a few examples for you. The first one is this picture. I want you to see if you can point out anything in this picture. The main thing I want to stress in this picture is that everyone's wearing hats. There was a time in culture and society where it was a common practice for everyone to have hats, and there was customs built around those hats. For an example, you would tilt your hat at a certain time. You would take your hat off whenever entering a building or paying your respects or condolences. And now the society and culture has changed where this is no longer the case. People wear hats inside. People don't tip their hats as nearly as often. I just wanted to stress how culture and society changes even in the US. Another point to drive this home is this illustration. On the left side, you see the horse and buggy, and it used to be the rich people had cars and the poor people had horses. And the bottom left, you see that now instead of horses pulling the cart, now the cart's pulling the horse. And so just society changes where rich people had cars and poor people had horses. Now rich people have horses and almost everyone has a car. I just wanted to stress how culture and society continues to evolve. And the right picture shows some common commodities that we used to reach out to our neighbors if we needed a little bit. We'd ask for some butter, some sugar, flour, eggs, milk, and now we probably wouldn't even dream of knocking on our neighbor's door asking for an egg in the morning. And so we just see that society changes. And I just wanted to really drive that point home. Another one was in the 90s, we were taught not to talk to strangers, never meet a stranger over the internet, stranger danger. and never get in a stranger's car. These were things that were ingrained into people. And then now we talk with strangers all the time. We, especially online, and we meet with strangers online. And in fact, we get into strangers' cars with Uber and Lyft and things like that. And so we just see how technology can change society, but how customs revolve around that societal change. So, as a background in studying cross-cultural studies and psychology counseling, I see this real balance between the self and others, individual and the collective, and how they play a role with the other. And so society encourages the preferred behavior and discourages the non-preferred behavior. And we see this through laws, we see this through tax breaks, we see this through all kinds of different ways that society reinforces itself. And so I just wanted to really drive home the point that culture changes through time. And I have a couple more examples. Here are some images of some cross-cultural custom interactions, and you'll see that each of these are an example of some kind of greeting. And the main thing I want to stress is that there's an issue with each of these examples. One you see here, Bill Gates' hand is concealed, and in South Korea, a concealed hand is taboo. It's not, it shows that you're hiding something, that you're maybe lying or concealing something. And so it just goes to show that you can communicate things without actually saying things. Here, John Kerry is doing actually a Thai bow, not a Korean bow. So we see that even cross-cultural intent can come across as miscommunication. And here we see President Obama bowing pretty low to the president of Japan. And in Japanese culture, the lower you bow, the less status you are, and the higher status you are, the less you bow. And so we just see that a lot is communicated in cross-cultural interactions, even if nothing is being said. And so the main thing I want to stress is how your intent cross-culturally can be received unintentionally, what you're trying to communicate. I have an example of a commercial I want to show you. This is an old commercial of a bank and how they have international relations and how the customs are different between these two cultures and the representative, and how they actually can clash in trying to out-respect one another. And so here is the clip, and let's see if the audio plays.
The English believe it's a slur on your host's food if you don't clear your plate. Whereas the Chinese feel you're questioning their generosity if you do. At HSBC, we never underestimate the importance of local knowledge, which is why we have local banks staffed by local people in over 80 countries across the globe. Okay. HSBC, the world's local bank.
So that was a funny commercial that showed how, the British being polite to clean your plate, and the Chinese, if a clean plate means you're still hungry and you need more food. And so you see this reciprocal cycle of trying to be respectful of the guests and be respectful of the host. And so we see this clash between the cultures in their intent. And so tying that back in with tribes, many of us have projects that we have and tribes that we may be working with, and there's a relationship that kind of bridges that between your agency or jurisdiction should maintain good relationships with tribes even outside of projects. But I just wanted to show how there is an importance between that relationship. Culture, when I talk about culture, I'm mainly speaking to something similar to this, where there's a group of individuals that kind of have a similar structure in belief, knowledge, and all these different things, customs and traditions. And so culture by definition, different cultures by definition would be different. And it's not uncommon for cultures to be naturally opposed to each other based on this definition. And you'll see more of that or understand more of that in a moment. There are a lot of terms that are used, like cultural awareness, cultural knowledge, cultural sensitivity, cultural competence. And I structure it something like this. I use cultural awareness as kind of an overarching umbrella, and the cultural knowledge is kind of something that you gain, and cultural sensitivity is also something that you can gain. And when those two are applied well, then you get culturally competent. And when you walk in that well, that's competency. And so that's kind of structure that I would kind of frame it as. And just go to show the flow that you can have cultural knowledge, but you need that sensitivity in order to walk in that well. I used to title this training cultural competency, but people would attend and afterwards they would think they were culturally competent. And it's like, no, I'm just providing the cultural knowledge component, and it's up to you to gain more cultural sensitivity, and then walking in that well is cultural competency. Culture is just so vast and different, and the one of the main things is terminology when it comes to different cultures. And I want to have an example of what I mean by that. And to really drive this point home of how one word we might be talking about different things is a dog. I want you to picture a dog in your mind. And now that you have that image of a dog in your mind, I want to show you two different images of a dog and how they can contrast. One is a res dog. On reservations, dogs, it's not uncommon for dogs to be like big rodents. You don't pet them, you don't spend a lot of time with them, you don't spend any money on them. It's quite common in numerous countries throughout the world for this to be the case. However, in really developed countries, it's vastly different. I remember in San Diego, I saw a dog that looked something like this. And I remember thinking, I totally thought that was a person, and it ended up being a dog. And we see that the dog on the right is treated quite well, probably lives a better life than I do. And so we just see how even the mention and discussion of a dog, you can have these two polarizing images of what a dog means to you. You may not have thought of either of these dogs, but it might have been somewhere in between. But my point is that when I'm talking of a term, and the term that you're thinking of may not be the same thing. And so part of the cross-cultural component is is understanding that there may even be a difference in terminology. And communication has what I would break down into different components. One is what was meant. So we think of something in our mind and we try and communicate it. So there's a lot going on up in our heads, and then the second component is giving words to it, putting breath to it. It's so weird that there's so much going in my mind, and I'm literally making words with my mouth, and you're somehow understanding a little bit of what I'm trying to communicate. And that's communication in general. And then cross communication, there's a layer of difference because there's after my thought and then my words, there's what was heard. How you hear it is a next step, and how it plays a role in what you understand. So how it goes from my brain to your brain, there's at least 4 steps to that. And if that's done well, then that's good communication. If it's done poorly, that's bad communication. And what's has to take place is reciprocal. So then what's in your brain has to come back to my brain through your words and through my ears. And so we see that there is a potential breakdown in 8 different areas of communication in general, and culture just can convolute that even more. Again, culture by definition means they're different. Otherwise, they would be of the same culture. And when you speak cross-culturally, you are bridging the gap between the cultures in some way or form. And I wanted to stress, I think due to time, I may skip some of this stuff, but when you communicate cross-culturally well, there's kind of this dance that happens. And it's a beautiful thing. And I hope that this presentation helps in that way. Another polling question I have is, what is the proper tribal terminology? Is it Native American, First Nations, Indigenous, American Indian, all the above? I want you to pick one in your mind, and the answer is all the above. I realize in my travels throughout the states, it's really regionally based on what they prefer. West Coast tends to prefer Native American. The states in the north prefer First Nations, and that's influence from Canada. A lot of the southern states prefer Indigenous, and that's influence from South America. And a lot of the East Coast prefer American Indian. There's still a lot of departments and bureaus that use the term Indian, and so it's quite prevalent on the East Coast. So I had to learn that, it's really different in their preference, but I would encourage you to use the name of the tribe instead of one of these umbrella terms. So I put a couple tables together for your benefit. You'll see that there's a topic and kind of 2 main columns. On the left side is the American column, and the right side is the Native American column. And I have kind of a respectful example and a disrespectful example, and I'll go through different topics to keep in mind before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. And so moving right into things to keep in mind before the meeting. One is introduction. Both cultures have a custom of introduction, but they both look a little different. In the American culture, generally, it's hi, how are you? Good. How are you? Good. And that's kind of the general introduction. Even if you're not good, you say good. Even if you genuinely don't care, that's kind of the process you go through. And it's kind of this greeting that's quite common. In Native American culture, The introduction includes a background of your tribe and kind of your heritage. In American culture, it's taboo to not have some kind of connection. It's quite common in American culture to have some kind of discussion for finding some kind of commonality, some kind of thing that you both share that's similar, to build some kind of common ground. In Native American culture, it's taboo to imply that the people are the same. In fact, where American culture discussion leads to commonality, Native American discussion leads to difference. What I mean by that is a Native person meets another Native person, they'll share their tribal background. If they're of the same tribe, they go to the next level to discuss the clans. And if the clans are the same, then they discuss the family. And so we see how the discussion goes until there is a difference. And so that's just something to keep in mind, that where Americans may try and find common ground, Native Americans may try and find some difference, even in the introduction. Just something to keep in mind. Eye contact is something that's quite important to keep in mind. In American culture, eye contact is preferred. It's taboo to avert your eyes often. In American culture, it shows that you may be hiding something or lying or making something up. But in Native American culture, it's the opposite. Native American culture, you avert your eyes out of respect. So if you look at someone square in the eyes in Native American culture, it's akin to challenging their level of respect or honor. If you avert your gaze, you're paying respect, homage to that individual. So even in your discussions with traditional Native Americans, just keep in mind that the eye contact is different, that just because eyes are averted doesn't mean they're lying or hiding, they're actually paying respect. This is a huge component that a training that is being more and more common with law enforcement, especially cross-culturally, when Native Americans are paying respect to the law officer, and how it's not necessarily the same translation to the general American population. So eye contact is something to keep in mind, as well as pointing. Pointing, I don't know why, but Americans love pointing with one finger. I think it's to be precise because it's taboo to be too vague. And Native American culture is the opposite. In Navajo, we point with our lips. We never point with one finger. In Native American culture, it's taboo to point with one finger because it's akin to placing a curse, or some kind of thing similar to that. So just keep in mind pointing, whether you're out in the field or in the meeting. I would say if you have to point, use all your fingers, just kind of point generally as opposed to using one finger. Respect and trust. This is a topic that is really important. In American culture, respect and trust is very individually based. In Native American culture, it's very collective based. In American culture, I think it's taboo to have preconceived notions. And so you greet people with a blank slate. Pretty much new people are started at neutral, and based on your interactions, they either increase or decrease in respect or trust based on the interactions. In Native American culture, you are accredited respect and trust based on your affiliation. Because it's taboo to be a lone wolf. It's like, who are your people? Who do you live life with? Who who are you associated and affiliated with? And an illustration I like to use to kind of drive this point home in regards to American culture and society is sports. I don't know how many of you are sports fans, but if you are, you have a favorite team and you have your arch nemesis competitive team that, in that sense. And if you meet someone new who's a huge fan of your team, then right off the bat, you're like long lost friends. Um, However, the opposite is true if you meet a stranger who's a number one fan of your rival team. Right off the bat, there's not much more that's going to improve that relationship. Um, that same process is how collective respect and trust is utilized in tribes. It's like, who's your tribe? And you're accredited all the respect and trust of that tribe or the disrespect and distrust. And this also translates into your jurisdiction or your agency. You aren't there as an individual, you're affiliated with your agency or jurisdiction. Um, so that's something to keep in mind when you face um, disrespect or distrust. I would encourage you not to take it personally, because it may be associated with your agency or jurisdiction, and the collective respect and trust and history is what's being kind of affiliated with you. So that's something to keep in mind, and you also have an opportunity to improve that respect and trust on behalf of your agency and jurisdiction. So that's something to keep in mind. Other things to keep in mind before the meetings is research terminology. Some of the terminology is quite different. I use HOOPA as an example of where it's all the same. HOOPA is the name of the res, HOOPA is the name of the town, HOOPA is the name of the tribe, HOOPA is the name of the language. It's all the same across the board. Some of the spelling's a little different depending on who you talk to. But that's different than other tribes, that the reservation is different than the name of the tribe. The town is different than the name of the tribe. And so just something to keep in mind. I encourage people not to touch things. Some things are sacred and reserved for certain people at certain times. So some things are sacred and should be treated as such. Food, if it's offered to you, should be consumed, because eating and drinking together is very communal. It's a give and take, and it's really a sign of that give and take relationship that you're participating in. If you refuse, it just communicates that you don't want to participate in that exchange. Understand that you're a guest, and I really stress that on the tribal sovereignty and tribal lands component, but they're sovereign nations immune to county and state laws. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Consultation protocol or policy should be looked at. Moving into from before the meeting to during the meeting. Some other examples of things to keep in mind is handshakes. Handshakes went away for a moment through COVID, but it didn't take long for them to come back in full force. American handshakes tend to be strong. It shows your work ethic and your passion, that you put yourself into what you do. It's taboo to have a dead fish handshake because it shows you have a poor work ethic, or that you don't put much of yourself into what you do. But it's almost the opposite in Native American culture. It's a relaxed handshake, not a dead fish, but just a relaxed grip. There's still form and structure to it, but there's no strength or grip behind it. And the reason behind that is it's In Native American culture, if there's a strong handshake, it means that you're harboring anger or hatred towards that person. And so the handshake is really symbolic of the relationship. So if it's a nice handshake, then it's a nice relationship. If it's a rough handshake, then it's a rough relationship. So that's just something to keep in mind. And again, we see how these cultures at default are directly opposed to one another and how they communicate the very opposite thing of what they're trying to communicate at the default level. But this is just something to keep in mind in your interactions. Decision making. Americans are very individually based in their decision making versus collectively based by Native Americans. And it's fascinating because in American culture, it's almost taboo to have alternatives. I think it's because it shows that you didn't really think it all the way through, or you're not necessarily picking the best option. In American culture, you do your research, you pick the best option, and that's what you present. In Native American culture, it's taboo to have a predetermined decision that you already have your mind made up and you just want everyone to sign off on it. Instead, Native American people want to be included in that process. And that's why early consultation is so important to show that, hey, things are still being figured out. And we want to bring you into this process as this project develops or goes through the permitting process. And so even when it comes to decision making, the ideology is vastly different, and how if you propose one option as the best solution, it's almost received as taboo in Native American culture because they weren't included in the process. So that's something to keep in mind when it comes to decision making and how in the meeting the decision making process should be kept in mind. And this is something that is so important when it comes to consultation and discussion revolving around a project. I have an example, but due to time, I'll skip that and go. I want to stress talking and answering. In American culture, it's quite interesting because most people think in thirds. What I mean by that is you're listening with a third of your capacity, you're processing with the other third of your capacity, and you're already coming up with a response with the remaining third of your capacity. And Native American culture is pretty much different in the sense that it's 100% listening, and then there's 100% processing, and then there's 100% response. And the 100% response may come in the form of storytelling. It may not be short and precise. It may be a story that eventually leads to a point. And in American culture, it's taboo to ramble on and on and on. It's like we all have things to do and a life to live. And it's like, don't waste my time. Just give me the essential meat of it. And in Native American culture, it's taboo to interrupt. We all have our own way of sharing things, and giving people room and space for that to happen is quite important in Native American culture. And so I really want to stress this when you're in a meeting, that there may be silence because there may be processing that's going on, or there may be a long-winded response in response to a question or a prompt. And so that's something to keep in mind. And silence is almost taboo in American culture. You'll almost like say anything to avoid the silence. But in Native American culture, silence is seen as a teacher. It's a space for you to learn. You can learn a lot in the space of silence. And so that's something to keep in mind if you're there are some meetings that's go, 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 go. And if there is space and time for silence and um, uh, storytelling responses, then that may happen when you're meeting with a traditional tribal person. I know I've mentioned time a few times, but time is a really different component when it comes to American culture and Native American culture. In American culture, it's very precise. I think there's a saying, to be early is to be on time, to be on time is to be late. And that's really revolving around really, you know, everything revolves around time. Um, it's taboo to be late because it's a reflection on not only the individual who's late, but also on the host of the meeting or the facilitator or even the people at the meeting. Um, and however, that's different in Native American culture. Native American culture isn't so precise. It's very fluid. It's honor based. What I mean by that is there's a philosophy of everything will happen in its proper time and place. The meeting starts when everyone who's part of that meeting gets there. The meeting ends when the meeting discussion is exhausted. It doesn't start at a specific time. It doesn't end at a specific time. It's more fluid than that. In Native American culture, it's taboo to rush things, to push things outside of their proper time and place. And so meetings can often be a reflection of this. So I share this because um, there may be a meeting where a Native American is late, and that's not a reflection on you or the facilitators or people present at the meeting, or even the Native American representatives, because time is just different. An example I use is if my grandmother comes home with groceries and I have to run to a meeting, my American side is like, good luck, Grandma. I'm going to be late to a meeting, so I have to take off. My Native American side is, you know, I have this meeting to go to, but it's more honorable for me to help my grandmother with the groceries. And I'll show up to the meeting whenever I get there. And so the concept of time is very different. It's not precision on the second and minute, but it's more based on the honor and how you are living and walking in that time. So that's just something to keep in mind. Wrapping up during the meetings, Native Americans are really spiritual people, and so a meeting may start with a prayer or something similar to that. In decision making, it's important to state your role and responsibility. Just as I mentioned, that association and affiliation, you represent your jurisdiction or your agency. And it's important to clarify how much decision-making authority you have or don't have. Writing things down can be considered a little taboo. What I mean by that is it's akin to whispering. In American culture, whispering is a polite custom because you don't want to disrupt what's going on. But in Native American culture, it's whispering and writing things down is taboo because it's like you're secretly placing a curse or something like that. You're concealing something that's not to the benefit of the the group or the people present. And so if you're writing something down, it's sometimes good to clarify, hey, I'm taking notes on the meeting, or if you're in the field, I'm just writing down some observations of what I'm seeing or something like that. Just some good communication would go a long way. Pictures are pretty important. It's important to ask permission to take pictures because you're capturing the essence of something. And so it's good to ask for permission before taking that essence without permission. Avoid jargon. We all deal with numerous acronyms day in and day out. And so just keeping in mind that Some tribal representatives may not be as familiar with certain acronyms, and so that's just something to keep in mind. So we covered before the meeting, during the meeting, and now we'll close out with after the meeting. One thing I always stress is partnerships. Partnerships look very different across these different cultures. American culture, it's very project-based. There's a reason for us to have a partnership. That partnership is towards something, some kind of project. In Native American culture, that's not the case. The relationship is based on the individuals or the groups collectively together. In American culture, it's taboo to have a lot of unbillable time, unproductive time, useless time. It all has to go towards something. But in Native American culture, it's very taboo to be exclusively business. In an example I use is many of us have had friends who, or at least one friend who always asks for something. Maybe it's money or for some kind of handout of some kind. And eventually at some point, every time you see that person, you're like, oh, what do they want now? And that's how tribes view agencies and jurisdictions when the partnership is limited to projects. And I would encourage you to expand that relationship beyond projects to beyond when you need something, to cultivate, strengthen, and foster that relationship. Because really relationships should not be exclusively business and they go beyond projects. Another thing to keep in mind after meetings is humor. If you experience humor during the meeting, that's a sign of good rapport. Accommodating deadlines is something to keep important. Decision making, if it involves a tribal council, sometimes they meet once a month, depending on the tribe, sometimes more, sometimes less. If it takes a general council vote, which is all the tribal members, sometimes they meet once a year, sometimes more, depending on the tribe. So those timelines should be kept in mind. Confidentiality is huge. I could talk over an hour about the different confidentiality laws and requirements. Best form of contact is a good practice to keep in mind, whether that's phone call or email, or I realize that in person is preferred amongst Native Americans because it's that face-to-face interaction. And if you take one thing away from today, I would like it to be that there are differences, and differences are okay. It's not that American culture is wrong or Native American culture is wrong, that they're just different, and different is okay. The point of today was to giving you more knowledge and understanding of how those differences may potentially impact your meetings and interactions. And I wanted to help improve that component of what you do. And I hope to given you at least a couple tools in your belt to improve those relationships. In closing this out, before I get to questions and answers, one question I get a lot is, walking between cultures, where's the line in cultural appropriation? And I would express it like this, the unacknowledged and appropriate adoption. So it's different than being considerate or honoring. It's another thing if you're owning it and saying it's a part of your identity that should be honored. And so just providing that room of, being accommodating is not appropriating, and appropriating is not accommodating. And so as you have interactions cross-culturally, especially with traditional tribal members, just keep in mind that, if you implement any of these, it's not appropriation. And some closing out best practices. I mentioned some of these, but having some kind of liaison is existing at every federal level, more and more common at the state level, and is slowly becoming a thing in the private sector. So I encourage some kind of liaison capacity, whether that be a third party or within your agency or jurisdiction. Meeting venues, just some things to keep in mind is being flexible, maybe switching up venues or facilitators, and closing out on conflict management. If there's ever conflict, which there often is between cultures, I get brought in a lot of times to help with the conflict, but really backing up to identifying what's being said. Again, going to that cross-cultural communication and where's the breakdown, but learn more about true needs as opposed to what's being expressed. Clarifying questions, brainstorm together on possible solutions, and go from there. With that, I'll open it up to questions and answers. Feel free to put questions in the chat. Here is my email and phone number if you want to shoot me a question or call me with a question. I would encourage you to utilize the email, as I may be in different meetings or different things like that. And so with that, thank you for your time. Thank you for letting me share some things, and I hope that it benefits you in a cross-cultural kind of way, and that your relationships with traditional tribal members would improve, whether that be individually on your behalf or whether that be on behalf of your jurisdiction or agency. With that, thank you for your time and attention, and I'll hand it back over to Bob to share the next thing.
Hey. Oh, look at the time, Ethan. Right. So one of the questions I had was, let's say you're a new person at an agency, and you now have a consultation in front of you, AB 52 consultation. What's a good first step that you could take in that? I mean, obviously you're going to contact the tribe. Should you just email the list and request consultation?
Yeah, if you're brand new position, new everything, yeah, I would encourage you to find out what tribes are in your area, and yeah, reaching out and establishing that first connection, contact. That was something I did when I first started, was I researched what tribes were in the area, and I went over and introduced myself just to put a face to their name, and that's a great place to start. Contacting the Native American Heritage Commission for a list is another great place to start, and going from there. I would say if you're brand new, that would be a good place to start.
Good. And when we talk about AB 52, and I've heard you say this, is that tribes have no funding to do the consultation. And so that's always an issue as far as limited time to respond to all these requests for consultation and projects and such. Any suggestions on addressing that aspect?
Yes. One is to understand that might be the case for a tribe. They may be understaffed, just like your agency or jurisdiction. They may be over inundated with notifications or other work and projects. But other than that, I think it would be important to at least have that discussion with the tribe at some point on clarifying priorities and notification efforts, as well as what are the next steps after that. And if funding is an issue, to have that difficult discussion of what's the next step, and what does that look like?
Okay, here's a question. Are we required to share ARC surveys with tribes under AB 52 if the tribe requests it?
There's no law. I don't think it's absolutely required by the law, but it's not prohibited by the law. And so if it is a tribe on the consulting list, then it would be very, very beneficial to provide that list, especially if you're going to consult on the potential impacts of that project. To discuss AB 52 would be potential impacts of the project on cultural resources and tribal cultural resources. And if that tribe has resources or interests in that, then that would benefit the consultation immensely to provide that.
Okay, great. And maybe just one other question, since I don't see any in here, is let's say I work for an agency that doesn't really have a good relationship with a tribe. I'm new at the agency. Maybe what's something I could do to help that? You mentioned that it's not the individual, but the jurisdiction that is sometimes held in a negative aspect. So is there any advice for us?
Yeah, I would say that it takes time and effort. It may be difficult, but it's not impossible. There have been month-long efforts that I've done to repair relationships, and it's taken a lot of time and effort, but ultimately those relationships were improved. And so it just goes to show that with some time and effort, things could change, and it's worth putting that time and effort and investment, not only on your behalf, but and on the behalf of the tribe, but even on behalf of your agency or jurisdiction. So I would encourage you not to lose hope, to do something's better than nothing, and it may take some time and effort.
All right. And you mentioned relationships often. So again, AB 52 isn't just a checklist of things that you have to go through. It's developing the relationship. I mean, I would say that's the intent. Some of the consultation requirements.
Yes, the way the law is written is it gives a lot of flexibility based on the relationship, based on the agency, based on the tribe, based on the project. And it's really, it just provided a space to come together and have the conversation or difficult conversation on potential impacts and how to move forward, whether that be mitigations or anything else like that.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Ethan. I'm sure our audience enjoyed what you did and remembered his contact information. And thank you for joining us today. And again, you'll get a message about where this recording is available.
Thank you.